Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're going to talk about the future of transport. In January 2023, the House of Commons Transport Select Committee kicked off its Our Future Transport campaign, in which the public was invited to pitch ideas on what the committee should investigate next. Well, over 220 ideas were submitted on a range of topics, leading to the shortlisting of 12 applicants who were then invited to pitch to the MPs in a Dragon's Den style process. 2 ideas made it through the grilling, and in June 2023, the Transport Committee launched 2 major new inquiries. The first into the future of transport data, to investigate the future uses of data in the transport sector to innovate and improve services. And the second was the Strategic Transport Objectives Inquiry, to examine how government develops strategic objectives for its future transport policies. Both inquiries should help guide the way the UK plans and invests in the transport systems that will be key to underpinning the nation's vital future economic growth, social well-being, and of course the journey towards the net zero future. The consultation period for the inquiries finished last month, in which the committee called for evidence and examples that should help MPs form that vital future policy. So in effect, the hard yards start now, as members of the committee examine this evidence and put together a set of recommendations to underpin our future transport. It is therefore my pleasure to welcome my guest today, Iain Stewart MP, Chair of the House of Commons Transport Select Committee. Iain has been deeply involved in the Our Transport Future campaign all year, so I hope will give us a steer as to how he sees these 2 inquiries shaping the future of UK transport policy and how he's getting on with making those vital recommendations. So Iain, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, Iain, as I explained, your committee is looking at these 2 critical issues facing transport over a process that you described as an eye-opening experience that will inspire and shape our scrutiny over the rest of this Parliament. So what made it so eye-opening for you?
Well, the rationale for doing these inquiries was, I think, there's an important bit of Select Committee's work to look ahead. It's very tempting and an important part of our work to look at the here and now, what's gone wrong. So whether that's air traffic control problems or cost overruns in a project, scrutiny and accountability is, of course, an important part of Select Committee work. But I really want us to be a sort of horizon scanner looking ahead. So that's why I describe it as eye-opening, inviting people to pitch to us as what they see are the new disruptors, the new challenges, the new opportunities. So that's the rationale behind this process.
Well, before we look at the detail of each inquiry topic, just give me a quick update as to what happens next, following the consultation closure last month. What are you doing on the committee now with this information?
Well, what we did when we launched the inquiry, we invited anyone with an interest, that could be a company, an organisation, an individual, to submit written evidence. That concluded at the end of last month. We're now reviewing all that. I'm taking away, when Parliament was into conference recess, something like 800 pages of evidence. So I'll be sitting down reading through that. And from that, we'll then draw up a programme of oral evidence sessions to get a good cross-section of the evidence we've received and invite witnesses to appear in front of the committee. And that will run through the rest of this year and probably into early next year before we draw our conclusions in our report.
Any regrets in terms of the ideas that got away? You had 220 submitted. Any disappointments regarding issues not raised?
Well, there were a number. Most of the responses were relevant. There were a few who used it as an opportunity to lobby for a particular cause. I remember seeing quite a few for Save Doncaster Airport, which is very laudable, but not the point of the inquiry. The limitation is time and capacity. There's only so much we can handle at any time. But what I'm hoping to do is take the strategic transport objectives one. When we've concluded that, and as long as we've got sufficient time before the general election, there are others that would follow on logically from that. So, for example, I'm very keen to do a sort of strategic freight inquiry, looking at that across the modes. Yeah. Freight's often the Cinderella of the transport world. It doesn't get the attention it needs. So if we've time, then there are a number of follow-on inquiries that I'd like to pursue.
Well, let's look at the first two. I mean, we'll come to these strategic objectives on in a moment, but start with unpacking the future of transport data. I mean, clearly new technologies such as artificial intelligence combined with the greater use and exploitation of data, I mean, it is set to revolutionise the future of our transport sector. I mean, what do you see as the most exciting and potentially transformational part of this change?
I see two broad areas. One is better predicting passenger flows and demands. So even at sort of individual points in a journey, you can make the passenger experience easier. So at an airport, if you know there are so many passengers coming in at a particular time, you can then plan to staff up the passport control or baggage handling or whatever it is. And in the sort of infrastructure maintenance, better being able to identify in advance where weaknesses or problems might come, so you can do an earlier, more efficient and cheaper repair before you're having to correct a major problem.
So that's all the way through the whole of the asset life cycle, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So recently, for example, you had the problem with that railway bridge in Oxfordshire at Newnham, which resulted in the line being closed for many weeks. But if there had been a mechanism for detecting that weakness at an earlier point, that repair might have been done much more efficiently and cheaply and not have that disruption. So that's just one example of where the savings may come.
I mean, your inquiries are going to be looking closely at the way data can improve this, as you say, the delivery of services and the management of infrastructure. You mentioned one there. Are there any other quick wins that you see might be on the horizon?
That's difficult for me to answer at this point in the inquiry, because that's what I want to review the evidence and then bring witnesses forward. So if I can hold an answer on that till a few weeks' time.
Okay. But you do also say that there have been innovations such as, and we mentioned AI, digital twins, live data sharing, third-party travel apps. You now want to see what might be coming around the corner. So from what you've heard in the initial bit of evidence, do you see any really interesting things coming around the corner that are really getting you excited? Goodness me, we need that into our transport system today.
Well, I mean, one of the submitters to the pitches that we heard was looking at the data that is on your phone as a passenger. We can monitor, the number of people who travel from London Euston to Milton Keynes Central, and take my journey.
Yeah.
But my phone monitors me from leaving my office to going home, and all the way I use and travel in between. So can that data be accessed and fed into the transport system? So that we have a better understanding, better able to predict what needs are.
Yeah. And of course, that is all about using these systems to make transport quicker, safer and more efficient. Thinking about how that might actually happen, is that something which is driven by government policy, or is it driven by the private sector really being given freedom to use its creativity?
Well, that's the critical interface of the government doesn't invent things, and if it did, it would be clunky and late and very inefficient. That research comes from academics, from private companies. But what often is required is from government is the sort of framework of regulation. For example, we're just concluding our inquiry into self-driving vehicles, where the UK is one of the world's leaders in developing that technology. But for it to progress, the sort of framework of regulation needs to be updated. And that's what we're calling for. So that's the role of the government to enable that development to take place.
Yeah, and enable the private sector to come forward with those ideas, presumably, as well. And
give investors the certainty that they've got this stable framework to put the money in here rather than in other countries. Yeah.
I mean, you also say, and you mentioned regulation, you say the inquiry will look at regulations and standards and the potential risks that this data usage may pose. I mean, you mentioned the use of data on mobile phones, and a lot of people get worried about privacy, etc. There's all sorts of unintended consequences. I mean, transport, particularly rail, is very risk averse and reluctant to change when it comes to introducing new ideas. I mean, how might this be navigated?
Well, you rightly highlight, privacy concerns. That's going to be a key one to examine. But there'll be, data is a commodity as well, and there'll be some circumstances that freely sharing that data will enlarge the cake for everyone. So it's looking at that right balance of people owning data and using it as a commodity, but sometimes thinking of the bigger picture and where that balance should lie.
Well, there's no doubt that whole area is incredibly exciting, and there's a lot of really great minds that are coming into it. But of course, the second area is the strategic transport objectives inquiry. That will look at how effectively government works across departments to set strategic transport objectives, and I suppose also, how it breaks down silos, which is kind of it's an ongoing problem. It's been around a long while, and it's probably not quite as sexy as the use of data and digital systems, but it's a big problem and it's an important problem. How big a problem would you say that is?
I think it is a challenge. Within transport, you often look at it in modes. I inherited, when I took over the chairmanship, inquiries into maritime, into aviation, into strategic roads network, as if they all exist in splendid isolation. So there is a need to look at transport as a whole, but also how transport sits alongside other policies. So, for example, if we're wanting to decarbonise and electrify large parts of the transport system, do we have the generating capacity and the grid capacity on energy? That's not a DFT matter to make that happen. So I want to look at transport as part of a wider picture in government, and also in areas where the gains might not be seen in the transport P&L, but elsewhere. So if you have a transport measure that improves air quality, the gain is in health because fewer people have respiratory conditions.
Yeah, I'm smiling because that is a huge challenge, actually trying to break down departmental silos and crossing over those boundaries. Is it possible?
It's certainly possible. There's also, alongside that, is breaking out of the traditional political cycles of 4 or 5 year terms. Very few transport investments are done. The big ones are not done in that window. You need to look at a much longer term perspective where the gains might not be realised for some time. Yeah. But it's important to do now.
Yeah. You'd say you do talk about in your preamble to the inquiries, about creating long-term visions for transport. What's stopping the formation of that single strategic transport vision, perhaps at a national level, to guide policy and investment decisions?
I think that there have been good moves in that direction. So in both rail and roads over the last 20 years or so, you have introduced the control periods of investment. So the industry knows what's coming. It's not been perfect, far from it, but it's moved away from the tap on, tap off, process, which was traditionally the way. So there are some moves in that direction. I think in some countries and parts of the UK, you do have that strategic transport vision. Whether it's the right one or not, that's a matter for debate. But it at least allows those decisions to be better appraised in the round. And I think that's the direction of travel we're on. I just want to give it a boost.
Okay. Well, I wasn't intending to bring up discussion around HS2, but it's in the news again this week as reports surface of yet more discussion between the DfT and the Treasury as to whether or not to continue with the second phase. Clearly that long-term strategic vision, it would help here. Is this something which the Transport Committee, is set to get involved in, is going to offer a view on?
Well, we do have, as part of our regular programme of work, we do have a 6-monthly inquiry into HS2. So the last one we did was in May when I took the committee up to Buckinghamshire. We did a site visit, looked at some of the issues on the local communities, and quizzed the then chief executive and the HS2 minister. We'll be doing that again this autumn. So yes, we absolutely keep a watching brief on it. But HS2 is an interesting one. Most engineers will tell you the reason why costs go up in a project is because the client keeps changing their mind as to what they want.
Right.
And when you look at the initial vision of HS2, and then people wanted extra tunnels and mitigations and this, that, and the next thing, and that's why one of the reasons why the costs have gone up. But it's a classic long-term vision. The same arguments were made about HS1. It was going to scar the Garden of England. It will be a catastrophe. Civilization will end. It's been running perfectly well with hardly any complaints, and most people now wonder how we got on without it. So it's
right. Yeah.
You do need that courage in politics to set out these long-term visions. And see them through. Yeah,
I mean, and I suppose that is the challenge for politicians, is to take on that leadership role, that strategic long-term leadership role, despite the reality that transport is never going to be seen by voters as more important when it comes to election impacts. It's never going to be seen as more important than health, education, and social care. I mean, to what extent do you think the lack of government focus on the prioritisation of transport as key to our nation's future, is to blame for some of this lack of strategic visions?
Well, again, transport's one of these funny issues. You're right; it doesn't regularly top the voters' priority list, but when something goes wrong, it very quickly does. 2 weeks ago, the head of the news was about stranded passengers all over Europe because their traffic control system went down. If the supply chain doesn't work and you can't buy petrol or diesel at the forecourt or the shelves are empty, people complain about it. It is an issue, but not, as you say, at the top of the agenda all the time. I think there have been some good examples where politicians have made the bold decisions. So I remember when I came into Parliament in 2010 and we faced all the financial problems then, an easy candidate for savings, in inverted commas, was to cancel the Crossrail, the Elizabeth line. And the Prime Minister and Chancellor at that time, to their credit, said, no, this is actually going to be an important strategic bit of transport infrastructure. We're going to carry on with it. And yes, the project was late and over budget and everything else. But now, again, imagine it not being there. There are examples where those right decisions have been made for the long term. We just need more of it, and it needs to be, I think, more strategically planned across the piece.
Yeah. I know that there's a lot of people in the north around Manchester who are waiting for their Crossrail. Again, bold. Yeah,
it's interesting. The one thing that's not really getting much publicity at the moment is the upgrade to the Transpennine route. Which is a massive multi-billion-pound investment. It's causing disruption at the moment, but when it's completed, it'll be a game changer for those cross-Pennine services.
Absolutely, it's been waiting a long while to come. Let's talk a bit about you, Ian. You've been MP for Milton Keynes South, as you say, since 2010, and you started your career as an accountant with Coopers and Lybrand, now PwC. Before moving into politics as a researcher, you also worked as a headhunter. But since 2010, you've served as Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Scotland, and as a backbench MP, you spent quite a bit of time on the Transport Committee. What took you into politics, and why are you so passionate about transport?
Well, in the politics bit, I don't come from a political family. When I was a kid, I was always fascinated what was going on in the news. And I had a great teacher at school that taught me that politics was at the heart of a lot of what was happening, and encouraged me to study it at school and then at university. And I was bitten by the bug, and it's fascinated me and fascinates me still ever since. Transport. I don't know where it came from, but for as long as I remember getting a Hornby train set as a Christmas present, age 5 or 6 or something like that, and again being fascinated by it, and that lifelong love of it's still there. So I've had the great joy.
The key question, though, have you still got the Hornby Railway set?
I do. I've actually one or two of them I have in a shelf in my office. The rest of it's packed up in boxes in my parents' loft,
right.
I think.
Oh, right. So it's not dominating your living room or anything like that at the moment, then?
Not at the moment, no. I think my other half would have something to say about that.
Well, being an MP, it's a tricky business with many issues to balance. I mean, how would you say that those challenges have changed since 2010 in terms of, actually, the ability to actually create change as an MP?
It's a really good question, and it goes back to the same issue that I outlined at the beginning of this discussion about why I wanted the committee to do some forward-looking work. The caseload you get as an MP from constituents, from issues here and now, is mushrooming. And you've got to be very careful not to allow that to cloud out everything else and take away from our role as legislators, as looking ahead at the big challenges. So it's not always easy, and there are only so many hours in the day, but I'm very keen to keep that element of my work, which is about thinking, which is about challenging yourself and others about what the solutions to problems are. So it's very difficult to maintain that balance. There's always, you've got to do this today, you've got to decide this today for an immediate thing, but right. Carve out space for the longer term.
And I suppose with transport, there are a huge number of vested interests, a huge number of people who are very, very, very passionate about their particular mode, which is you have to navigate that. What's your favourite mode of transport, Iain?
It has to be trains. I have lifelong love of them, but I've always been careful. I'm not chairman of the Rail Select Committee. I'm chair of the Transport Select Committee. So actually looking at how the different modes fit together is incredibly important because, as I said earlier, very few people want to travel from London Euston to Milton Keynes Central as a start and end point. It's from your office to your home or to the shop or to the hospital or whatever it is. So you need to look at journeys in the round.
And that's where the difficult bit, the last mile conundrum, is something which is, will we ever solve it? I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Well, I think that there is good practice there. So if you look at down in Devon and Cornwall, Martin Hopwood, the GWR, has done some incredible work in integrating the local branch lines there with bus services. So you have a sort of more of an integrated system. I think technology will create part of the solution. In Milton Keynes, we've got the Starship delivery robots, which will take your groceries from your local Tesco or Sainsbury's to your home. We'll probably have electric self-driving pods at some point in the future. Yeah. So there are solutions, but when they'll come, how they integrate, that's where the challenge is.
At risk of finishing this particular segment on a negative, do you have any worst transport experiences that are guiding your thinking?
I've not had anything that was absolutely catastrophic. I've had my fair share of delayed flights, lost baggage, cramped, crowded trains, everything else. I say nothing absolutely dreadful, but irritating. But the way to create traveling by train or any other mode can be a joy. It connects people, it refreshes the soul if it's done well, and you arrive comfortable and refreshed. And that, I suppose that's what guides me. That's what I want the norm to be. Okay, and I think that's what we all want from our transport, whether it's public, whether it's private, whether it's short distances or long distances. Let's go back to the politics of infrastructure. I mean, in last week's podcast, we talked about planning and the need to engage communities. Are the difficulties in our planning systems simply a case of politicians failing or being unwilling to show that vital, we talked about earlier, the leadership necessary in difficult situations? I think it's more complex than that, because it's very easy for a politician to commit, government to commit to an outcome. which will be controversial. When you build something, it causes disruption, and people don't like that. And I think where there's been a decline in trust is when you've got big operators coming in, how they engage with the local communities. Now, to give an example of something that was bad but is now good, in my part of the world, they're building, it's almost complete, reopening East-West Rail from Milton Keynes through to Oxford. Now, initially, they didn't do well in engaging with the community on road closures and noise mitigation and everything else. But to their credit, they listened and now have a much more positive relationship with the local communities. So if it's done in the right way, you can bring people with you and show them that, like you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Reasonable people get that. But if you just say this is happening, like it or lump it, people's backs are up and they're going to rebel.
Well, it's interesting because we did also last week talk about the need for honest debates and open consultations. But to an extent, the public is quite cynical about the fact that, will the views expressed in consultations, will they actually be listened to? I mean, is that something which, worries you when you sit there on your transport committee or as an MP?
It's my experience of consultations is mixed. Some I think have been a box ticking exercise, and that's where the cynicism comes from. But others genuinely, can shape the outcome for something. So to give an example of that, when I was a minister in the Scotland office, and we were designing. Coming out of the EU, the access to the structural funds ended and was being replaced by what's called the Shared Prosperity Fund. And we proposed a formula to look at how much was allocated to each part of the country. And we did a consultation with local authorities and others, and they came out and said, actually, it would be better to do it this way. So at the end of it, what they fed in changed the end product. So it's a mixed picture, but I can understand there's been too many, as I say, tick box ones that breed cynicism.
No, I mean, clearly public trust in transport projects, whether it's HS2 or smart motorways or new runways or road schemes, it is quite low. I was going to ask you whether politicians are doing a good enough job, but change is always difficult. I mean, are there some top 3 tips maybe, or some tips that for infrastructure professionals planning projects or policies that might make it easier for politicians like you to support them?
I think it's not always feasible, and for obvious reasons, some of the bigger infrastructure projects you can't do this. But if it's possible to pilot something, so you've got some real term evidence and people in a local area can see how it works. And does work, then that, I think, will help reassure people. You're right, people don't like change. Smart motorways is a case in point, where a technology that could be safe, there have been serious questions raised about the reliability of the lane detection system and so on, which is improving, but it's going to take a long time to reassure people that it is safe. In terms of automation, if you go on the Victoria line or the DLR, it's run by a computer, and people don't think, oh no, you can't take a train driver out the cab because what if it goes wrong? So it's you do have to reassure people and bring them with you.
Going back to your 2 inquiries. Do you see the big wins for the use of data? Do you see that in design, in construction, operation, in management? Is it across all of them, or do you see a particular big win in any particular part of the asset life cycle?
I think it's all of those. As I said earlier, there's an opportunity for better monitoring of live assets to ensure their safety and earlier interventions in planning. Both the big projects, but also day-to-day operations. There'll be opportunities in construction to do things better, faster, quicker, safer, more cheaply. and so on. So yes, I don't see it being confined to any one of those areas.
And in terms of the strategic objectives, I mean, if there's one thing you could change tomorrow that that would really accelerate this move towards finding the right long-term strategic transport objectives, what might that be?
I'm going to be a bit controversial and say get the Treasury to think of the longer term rather than the short term. And that applies to any party in government. I think Harold Wilson said it doesn't matter which party's in office, the Treasury is always in power. But to have that slightly longer term perspective on these issues.
Well, that's a big and a tough one, that is. But so finally, looking at the professionals, I mean, how might the infrastructure profession, I mean, they've already come to you with some really good ideas. I mean, how do you think they can accelerate the adoption of these new ideas? What do you want listeners to this podcast to do tomorrow to prompt the right change and really give us the right transport for the future?
Well, and this is what has to be led from the centre, from government, but give people the incentive, the opportunity to think outside their own particular area. It just depresses me in the rail industry at the moment because the post-COVID, the DfT is effectively micromanaging every decision. It sort of sucks the incentives out of the system. Now, I know the government's trying to change that, reform passenger contracts and everything. It is happening, but slowly. But that's sort of indicative that that there's some ridiculous stories that someone in the DfT had to sign off the design of a coffee cup holder. No one had the ability just to think it through and do it and get on with it. So that encourage a little bit of lateral thinking and risk taking.
Okay,
I think would be helpful.
Really, really interesting, and some really huge challenges there, Ian, but some great opportunities. I think it's a big subject, and I think it's good that the committee is taking on those big issues and really trying to challenge the industry to do better. So thanks so much for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast. I look forward to hearing more about the recommendations that come out of your inquiries.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks, Ian. That's all we've got time for today, unfortunately, though. But we've got more in the pipeline, more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website. That's www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information to this podcast and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. And do subscribe to receive the new infrastructure newsletter. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Ian for sharing his thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.